Okay, so this game is Palatinus, and it holds from 2 to 5 players. This isn't quite my first look at it. I played it 2-player with my wife yesterday. First time looking at it. It's got this little 4 pages of rules that are fairly well written, a little dense for that many pages, but once you work your way through them once, and you say, what is this game about? And you read them again, you kind of get an understanding of what it is all about. So, this is a game that's not very well connected to its theme. But, you know, people have been telling me, you're playing a few too many of these, Roman Republic and classical Roman and all these type of games. You ought to do something different. And I agree. So I'm doing pre-Republican Rome, actually pre-Roman Kingdom. All right, but in terms of theme, this is really just a way of presenting a certain mechanic in the game more than anything else. The theme barely matters at all. It is a pure strategy game of placing little pieces and scoring points based on them. Kind of reminds me, I'm probably going to get the name wrong, but there is something I think called Samurai that came out back in the 90s with these funny little pieces in Japan that you score points off of. And really confused me because there are really cool games named Samurai. Or maybe it was named Shogun, I don't know. But anyway, it was a pure Euro game, and I hate when things sound like they're going to be historical and they're not. This I knew wasn't going to be terribly so. It is very little so. It's purely a strategy type game. Let me explain what happens. Well, first of all, you have a different set of pieces depending on the number of players you have. I'm going to play 5 players, of course, because I like to capture as much as I can. But you're only playing with, say, 3 of these farmers, and each group has its own little picture on them. So these farmers are different from these farmers. Everybody has their own little image. And on the backs of them, it's important how many you get of this kind. Some of them have wolves and some of them don't. The point with the wolves is you can place those down hidden. Well, you must place them down hidden. Nobody knows what's under there except for the player who placed it. They can peek. And then the merchants, well, you have 2 regular and 1 wolf in this number of players. And the other, and there's always a balance. Farmers always have more wolves or hidden pieces. Soldiers are never hidden, and they work very differently from the other pieces. This little cube's used for scoring on the back over here, which is done at the end of the game. There's a piece that's not really described. It's this blank. I'm assuming it's a wolf. You can place it face down when you have nothing. It's not covered in here as an inhabitant. I'm not sure it really should exist, but it's specified that you get all the pieces of your color in 3 or 2 players and not in others. It's an interesting option to play with it if it's not even meant to be there, if it's just meant, as an extra counter in case you need it. Well, even in that case, it still makes an interesting little option to be able to place a counter that nobody knows about. I'm not going to play with it in the 5-player game because there's no indication you used there, but in the 2-player game, we did play with it, and it did. I think it added a little interest to the game. I could see where you wouldn't want it because you'd want to know that there's definitely a piece in any place. I can't do these one-handed. So let's go over the setup of the game. I'm going to start with the blue player as the first player and go counterclockwise as I always do, just to be confusing. And the first player draws one of these tiles, puts it in the center, and this is going to be the Palatinus tile. Puts the Palatinus counter here. That's how many victory points this tile is going to be worth to control. Then the next player picks the next tile and can put it anywhere adjacent to that. Well, it doesn't much matter where it is except that you might turn it in different directions. There's different pieces, different indications on each tile. So the center is the hill. There's 7 hills of Rome. Well, you can't actually do anything with the hills. You can't put pieces there. At least as far as I know. Maybe I'm mistaken. See, it says it has to be placed on an empty space. I'm assuming that the hill is not empty. This little diagram tends to indicate that it's not empty because the spaces with people on them are not. The other two kinds of spaces are fields, which farmers want to be empty, and springs, which farmers don't care if they're empty or full. And we'll see that in a moment, how this works. But it doesn't seem to matter too much how the board is built. I'll just put this here, and then I draw one of these and put it in the middle. And that becomes the point value of that tile. Now, the different tiles are going to be scored in alphabetical order, which means tile A is scored before tile B is scored before. And the scoring can affect the board position. We'll see how that works in a moment. These other tiles over here, these are just random scoring markers that sometimes you accrue in addition to the main scoring markers, which are the ones for the hills, or the pieces. Okay, so now we're on the orange or the yellow player, and he picks one. Hey, what does he want? I don't know. This looks interesting. He has to place it with the Palatinus in the middle and next to two pieces. So he had the choice of this space or this space, with rotation being as desired. But this looks kind of interesting with all these wells. Now we're on the next player, and none of these players really have... there doesn't seem to be a tremendous goal here in terms of placing things. There may be some interesting factors that one can learn as they're playing that'll affect this, but for the most part it seems to be just designing a board. It's not like Magic Realm where you're able, to really make kind of boned situations. Here I'm trying to put springs near each other for whatever reason. A being next to B reduces the value of B. This next one here, F. Well, F is hosed no matter what. I'm going to put a lot of water next to each other just to see how that works. Okay. So now, how about the play of the game? Well, starting with the first player, everybody's got these little things to hide their pieces, and these kind of fold, and they keep their setup pieces behind them so that nobody can see what they have left. Each player in turn is allowed to play a piece on any empty space. They can play any piece they like. There's a proviso here, though. In more than two players, or what is it, more than three players, you can't play a soldier in the last 3 or 4, in the case of 2 or 3 players, placements. So you only have 1 soldier in this game, 2 in the smaller number of players, but you have to have played him before you get down to your last, well, when you get down to your last 3 pieces. If you haven't played him and you have 4 pieces, you must play him. Playing is just slapping pieces down on any empty space on the board. The important thing is why you play, and that's the scoring. And the scoring is going to be done tile by tile. So you start with the alphabetically earliest tile, A in this case. There's an H tile and an expansion, which can replace a random tile, giving more water to the area. And 3 things are scored. Well, 2 things are scored, really. The first is the soldier. Now, the way the soldier is scored is every adjacent space to him, doesn't matter if it's on his tile or not, is revealed, whatever's on there. So some things may already be revealed, but others may not. They may be wolves. And they're shown at this point. It doesn't matter. Nobody can do anything anymore. If there are the same number of merchants and farmers adjacent to them, doesn't matter what colors they are, what tiles they're on, whatever, the soldier leaves the map. If there's a differing number, like more merchants than farmers or more farmers than merchants, the player owning the soldier captures all the tiles that are adjacent to him of the larger variety. And he gets them back in his pile, and will score 1 point each for those at the end of the game. Okay, that's kind of a weird mechanic. And how do you order soldiers? Well, they both happen at the same time. And if more than one soldier captures the same inhabitant, well, that's what these extra 1 point markers are for. It's a fairly rare occurrence, I think, but we'll see. Okay, so that's one part of the scoring. The other part is you have to count the influence on the tiles themselves. Now, you start with the little red arrow, and this doesn't really matter, and work your way around clockwise. It's just really, you need a place to start, and the little red arrow helps remind you. So you look at whatever piece is in that space. If it's a farmer, well, a farmer will score 2 points. These scores for influence are going to show up here. This is competing to try to get the value of the little laurel counter that goes in the middle on the hill. That's the actual victory points. These are just influence points towards that victory point. Now, to gain those influence points, a farmer would gain 2 points for each empty field he's adjacent to, and 2 points for each spring he's adjacent to, whether or not there's anyone in it. These can be on different tiles, whatever, it doesn't matter. Add to that, well, each merchant collects points equal to the number of dots on pieces that he's adjacent to. So, as an example, and notice the wolves don't tell you what they are until you flip them over, and you have to flip them over at this point. In terms of valuing for this, merchants who are adjacent, a merchant who has a merchant adjacent to him gets 1 point for that, gets 2 points for farmers that are adjacent to him, and he gets 3 points if he happens to survive to be adjacent to a soldier. And this again is added to his influence. Only the pieces on one tile get to add up. We go through all the different hexes on a tile, and whoever has the most influence on that tile gets the laurel counter. If there's a tie, it doesn't matter how many ways, each player who's tied instead just gets a 2 point token. And again, that's probably fairly rare, but I'm sure it can happen. I'm kind of curious. I guess it doesn't matter. I was going to say, if there's no pieces at all, does everybody get a 2 point marker? But it doesn't really matter. You're just going for a sum here, so it's probably best not to hand them out in case you might run out, right? We actually had that happen in our 2-player game. So those are the ways you get points. You get points off of the laurel counters, any markers you gain, and any captured pieces. And captured pieces can be your own color or someone else's. Now, I'm not going to use these little hidden things because my mind's hidden enough from me. And I guess I'll just get started. Be back in I'm going to load this one up. I'll be back in a little bit to show the actual play.